Hello and welcome to another episode of Gender Stories. I know I'm always like excited, thrilled, elated, but what can I tell you, dear listeners or watchers, if you're watching on YouTube now, I have the coolest guests. And today I have the honor of introducing Dr. Roger Kuhn, who is a Poarch Creek Two-Spirit Indigiqueer, somacultural sex therapist, sexuality educator, writer, activist, and musician. Roger's work explores the concept of decolonizing and unsettling sexuality and focuses on the way culture impacts and informs our bodily experiences. He's a community organizer of the Bay Area American Indian Two-Spirit Powwow and a board member of the Two-Spirit and Native LGBTQ Center for Equity. His first book, Somacultural Liberation, is available in both paperback and audio, and his music can be streamed on all digital platforms. And if you have not come across Roger's music, I would really invite you to stream it because it's wonderful. I had the pleasure to see Roger perform live when I was visiting New York City back, I think it was December 2023. And it was like, oh, it was such a wonderful experience. I am still I'm still smiling and feeling happy just remembering that moment because it was such a wonderful performance. So welcome, Dr. Roger Kuhn.
Thank
you so
you.
much for making time today.
Thank you again for the invitation, and what a lovely introduction. Thank you so much. It was so cool when you're on stage. Oftentimes, you got those lights in your eyes, and you don't see who's in the audience. And then when I realized that you were there, it was such a joy to see you there. So thank you again for coming to that show. That was a really fun show. It was so cool. I had a really good time. I hadn't performed in New York in like 15 years or something like that. It had been a really long time. So that show to me was so special, so personal, and a lot of my older listeners came out because that's where I started. My music days was in New York City. So, and then I had new listeners come out too. So it was really just a wonderful moment in my life.
It was so fun. And it was so serendipitous too, because I was in New York for this fundraiser for an art nonprofit that I support there, Giuliani Piazza. And I was literally staying like, I think a block and a half from where you were playing. And I saw you were playing and I was like, I have to go. And I just had the most wonderful time. And it was also like when worlds collide, right? There were like sex therapists there, but it was the music scene. And I love live music so much.
Yeah.
And I think that really encapsulates in a way just how creative you are. Like you're a sex therapist, you're an author, you're an organizer, you're a musician. I think you're working on a play, if
Yes.
I remember
Yes, I have.
correctly,
Yeah.
right? So uh, there's just this creativity I feel that oozes out of you.
Oh.
And that just feels almost restorative to witness. That's the best way I can put it. I was going to start from talking about your book, but maybe let's start from that, the creativity piece. Tell me more about the role of creativity in your life, in your own life. Like, I'm always curious about like, how do people relate to creativity?
I think it relates a lot to my gender and my sexual orientation, which I have yet to define fully. And what I love about being a creative is that it gives me an opportunity to express how I'm feeling. And I grew up on a farm in rural North Dakota, and I was very blessed to have space around me as a child and no one who told me I couldn't sing because I was out in the field or I was out in the woods and no one could hear me. So I was always able to create these stories and these characters and write songs, and I was singing to the trees and the animals, and I always had a little dog companion that would come with me. So it's been very much a part of how I understand myself in the world is to be a creative. And my main medium has always been music, though as I've gotten older in life, I've also recognized that writing has been it's interesting because I always consider myself a musician, and I forget, like, well, songwriting is a part of being a musician.
Yes.
Though, I was kind of figure, like, I've been writing my whole life. Though, this different kind of writing, this more like academic writing, or the kind of writing you do for like a book. Very different kind of creativity, though it comes from that same source, and that source is the same source that has all this multi-directionality, and how I experience my way of being in the world, my gender to my orientation, and my creativity just is this light that carries all of those things out into the world. And I think if you listen to my catalog of music throughout the course of my life, you sort of notice these iterations of where I'm at, what I'm doing, how I'm growing, what I've learned. And I can't imagine my life without creativity of some kind. And I think that even shows up, when you're a creative, it shows up how you work with clients.
Yeah.
It shows how you educate people. I'm also a sex educator, so it also shows up in the way in which you are with other human beings. It's not just the artist is like the creative part. It's like, no, like the way I drive down the highway is pretty creative sometimes, or getting from point A to point B can be a very creative experience. How I dress can be a creative experience. I think it's all a part of. I fear the day that artists can no longer create art. I think that to me is like the final point when we have known that we have fallen from whatever semblance of decency and humanity that we have when artists get censored, because I don't know that it's happened as much in my lifetime. I mean, I remember when I was growing up there was a lot of censorship around hip hop.
Mm-hmm.
Less so now, though I'm beginning to understand that, like, in these times that we're living in, the artist's job is to disrupt. The creative's job is to use their creativity as a medium for transformation, and to allow other folks like yourself or whomever who maybe aren't musicians or aren't sculptors or painters or what have you, to recognize, like, you're not alone. There are other voices who feel similar, and my medium may be music or writing, your medium may be dance, your medium may be sculpture, whatever it is, we are all needed. All creatives are needed, whatever your creative is. Cooking, right? The,
Yes.
the artists need to be fed that are doing the protests. Like, there is a need for all creatives to show up, to support one another, to continue the work of liberation. That's kind of how I feel. Like, creativity for me is an extension of my liberation practice.
Oh, I might cry actually a little bit. I was getting quite emotional when you were
Mm.
talking. Oh, yes. Wow. I think I haven't got quite this emotional right at the beginning of an interview before, but so many things that you talked about really touched my heart, but didn't just touch my heart. I think they also touched my cultural upbringing. I was brought up
Mm.
in Italy, and I spent a lot of time in Sicily because that's where my maternal grandmother is from, and she was my main caregiver growing up. And then really, when you were talking about that freedom of like singing and creating, I was like, yes, being brought up in a culture where it was like everybody was singing. We didn't have a lot of entertainment in the 12 hours car ride, from Rome to Sicily, which we did numerous times a year. And so we would all sing. And then in the evening, we would all sing together, and there would be dancing, and there would be people cooking all the time. And just like, I really have come to appreciate how not only being rooted in like time, place, language, but also just this culture of like creativity for the sake of creativity. You make beautiful food because you care about your community and your family, right? You sing together because it feels good, and also it's shared um, passing on of
Mm.
culture as well, right? Like the folk songs, the prayers, the music, the even our religion is so like expansive and creative.
Mm.
The processions, in Sicily for the festivals. We have the Madonna della Neve, which is Mary of the Snow. So all the kids would like collect all the jasmine so that we could make the
Mm.
snow in August. Because also, when the hell does it snow
Yeah.
in most places in Sicily? But that was the miracle, right? But even the religion expression was so creative. And I remember in my early 20s, the first time I went to Northern Europe, like I went into a Catholic church in Germany, and I was like, is this a Protestant church? And they were like, no, it's Catholic. And I was like, oh, really? And then I went to
Yeah.
service, and I was like, this is so sad. This
Mm.
is not my experience, right? And so even seeing how the same religion can be transported into a different culture, into a different context, and can be
Yeah.
made so constricted somatically rather
Mm.
than
Mhm.
expansive. And so as you were talking, I was really feeling that that expansiveness that
Mm.
comes from creativity, that expansiveness that comes from like culture and connection and community and movement and music and I don't think it's an accident also. My brain is like trying to harness 500 thoughts at once. You know, you started talking about gender as well. And I don't think it's an accident that so many of us were kind of gender expansive, two-spirit, trans, non-binary, whatever we want to call, you know, words to capture a much more expansive experience, I think, that happens inside of us. I don't think I don't think it's an accident that so many of us are creatives, healers, educators, right? There is something, for me, there's something like spiritual about the
Mhm.
expansiveness of creativity, but also of that fluidity, expansiveness. I don't even know what the word is for gender,
Mm.
right? And we were talking a little bit about this before starting recording that internal experience can be so much more expansive than one we can represent on the outside. And so, yeah, I wonder if you have any thought about that connection between gender, spirituality, creativity, or even healing, or
Yeah.
anything. Just go for
Well, sure.
it.
I was also raised Catholic.
Oh, I
And I
didn't
was
know
raised
that.
Catholic, like in a German community. The little town that I
I'm
grew up
sorry.
in, so it's fine. But the little town that I grew up in North Dakota had a very predominant German speaking community. My grandparents, my father, German speakers. And so being raised in the Catholic Church, I don't know Catholicism outside of that. I left the Catholic Church in my teen years. Though when I've been introduced to Catholicism, like Catholicism as it's seen in Central America, to me was like, it was
Yes.
like it was colorful, it was bright, it was beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
And the same with what I've recognized about Catholicism and other cultures around the world. Though the interesting thing about being raised as a from the sect of Christianity is that at least the way that I was taught, was that God was male, that there was God with God the Father, and there was always this sort of curiosity I had as a little kid of like, really, like this all-knowing, all creating thing is like this is male, because I did not have a good relationship with my own father, and so I didn't want God to be a father. I wanted God to just be. I wanted God to be accessible because my father was not. And so it felt stunted to me that, like, because in my mind, like, fathers were not nice people. They were strict, they were mean, they were all these things. So I early on adopted into my own thinking and consciousness that if there were to be a God, the God that I believed in was transformative, was a shapeshifter, was all
Yes.
of these things, was fluid in this way, and that brought me closer, I think, to spirit, and that allowed me to also then come closer to my own understanding when I was told that I was a boy as a kid. It's sort of like, well, I mean, I know that my body looks like that, though I don't feel like that. Though there weren't other kids. The town I grew up in was also very small, so I didn't understand or see other kids that were kind of like me. That I liked. I wanted to be on the gymnastics team as a kid, and no boys were on the gymnastics team, but I really wanted to be on the gymnastics team. I also have three older sisters. So I wanted to be a cheerleader. I wanted to
Yes.
play with Barbies, though I also wanted to play with He-Man, and I wanted to play with Thundercats, and I wanted to. There was a way that there was this fluid way that I went between these two things that I thought, well, isn't that life? We just kind of move through these ways the same way that God does.
Mm-hmm.
And I've always just kind of held that belief in myself that, although I've dabbled in many different sort of religious practices and ideologies, I was a practicing Buddhist for many years. I'm at this point in my life now where, as I've gotten more and more in touch with my internal understanding of self, that, like, I call to spirit all the time, and it's never this white beard, flowing
Okay.
clothing kind of thing. It's like this light that's there
Mm-hmm.
for me. And it's always circular. It's like this circular orb, which is how I see gender, which is how I understand gender. My gender is like this circular orb that, because I don't believe in the binary, it's if it's this circular thing, I can go up, down, left, right, around, inside, which is what I think that spirit is too. Their spirit is doing all those things. And I feel like my gender is doing all those things too. And it's through my connection, because I do consider myself a deeply spiritual person, it's through my connection with spirit that I feel more comfortable in my proclamation of my identity as what we say in Muskoki, which is like sort of the English translation of that is two-spirit, though the Muskoki translation of that is the middle. I am one that is in the middle. And I love that idea. And to me, like spirit is in the middle of what is known and what is unknown. Just like my gender, there's parts of my gender that are very known and parts of my gender that are very unknown. And so I reside in this middle, which means that in my curiosity, in my exploration of spirit and gender, I can go anywhere. There's no wrong direction that I can turn in my investigation, in my curiosity, in my exploration. That's what I love so much about my understanding of my gender identity.
Oh, I love that so much. And I so resonate with so much of what you said. I'm also not Catholic anymore. And also recognizing that my flavor of Catholicism was very animist, was very like
Mm,
syncretistic. There was a lot of like what I would call witchcraft. Honestly,
mm.
now I recognize like my aunt was definitely like one of my aunts was definitely like the village witch, in Sicily. But of course, she would be very offended. She was just a good Catholic who just
Mm.
knew how to take the evil eye out, and heal people because that's what you do,
Yeah.
right? And which is really interesting. And but I so relate to that expansiveness and to this like, how could God be one thing? I remember like being really like arguing with the priest even when I was a teenager, going, I don't think there is a hell. I think we put ourselves in hell when we cut ourselves off from God, and God is not. I was very grateful that I came into my teenage year as the liberation theology in
Mm.
South America was like really starting to like explode culturally beyond, its confines, and also where there were like feminist theologians starting to talk about God as mother. And I think one of the popes, I can't remember which one right now, but started to talk about God as mother. And I was like, yes, this makes more sense. God has no gender. We have no boundaries between us. We
Hmm.
just like spirit has no boundaries. Spirit is in everything. And people are like, oh, you're so young and naive. I was like, I still feel that way in my 50s. In fact, I think I feel more strongly about
Yeah.
it now than I did, because it's I don't have that cultural gaslighting of
Yeah.
adults around me going, oh, you don't understand yet, if that makes sense.
Yes, because when you realize and sort of study how religion has been weaponized against gender,
Yes.
and how it's been, how like it's been this tool for colonization, and it's this tool of the decimation of other cultures and of peoples,
Mm-hmm.
then it's like, well, I want nothing to do with that. That's the part of it.
Exactly.
I love the Catholic part of community. I love the Catholic part of like I love the artistry of Catholicism. I love the stained glass windows.
Mm-hmm.
Though I don't like the excuse that it's been given, like granted, like, well, God said we could do this to your people in particular. God said we could do this. It's
Mm-hmm.
like what? Or how like Two-Spirit people, during the early colonial days, were so misunderstood by the church and by the colonizers. So it's like, how could I trust that? Though I didn't know that as a kid. Like I didn't know that when I was growing up
Mm-hmm.
Catholic. That's what I knew that I came from like this mixed household. My father's white, my mother's Native American. So I knew that was my story, though I didn't, and I knew that my grandparents and my cousins all lived like in this community of Native people in the South, though I didn't quite understand like, oh, the reason why we live like the way we do, or the reason why there are these reservations near the
Mm-hmm.
farm that I grew up on, is because religion gave people the right to steal land and murder people. Like what? That was all missed in
Yeah.
my early childhood, even in my teen years. It wasn't until I kind of left that community in North Dakota that I started to go, oh, well, no one ever told me that. And I wasn't educated in that particular way. And I don't think most folks, at least where I grew up, are educated in that way to sort of understand how religion has been used as this tool. So to come back to spirit to me has been very healing, because I was very mistrusting of it for a
Of
really
course.
long time. And still, I'm still mistrusting of religion.
Yes.
Though I'll tell you, whenever I travel, one of the things that I always want to do is go to a church. I always want to see, like, how are they worshiping here? How are they celebrating? I want to see the cathedral. I want to see the church. Like, I always love to look at churches when I travel, because I'm still, or temples, or spiritual centers, because that is, to me, one of the most sacred ways of being in the world, is connection to spirit. However the person does it, I just want people to know the truth.
Absolutely. And so many of those churches and cathedrals that were built because of Christian supremacy were built on sacred places, right? If I
Yes.
think about, back to my own kind of homeland, for want of a better word, but like, the Madonna di Montevergine was like the protector of like gay and trans people and queer
Mm,
people, and people still go. Like the church tried to stop them on February, for the Candelora was built on a site where we think that Cybele was worshipped, right? The Phrygian
mm,
goddess, where like the Galli as priestesses, and so I feel like there is this kind of line of spirit and gender defiant, expansive, whatever we want to call it, in an international level. Because even to spirit, I know is this pan-indigenous term that
yeah.
folks in North America kind of came up with to like, recapture what had been taken by
Right.
colonization for many people, right? It's like, but though a lot of those sites are built on sacred places, and you can
Hmm.
almost feel it, right? Whether you know
Mm,
it or not. And so I so relate to a lot of that. And I also really connect to what you said about that connection between gender and colonization. I mean, I felt so strongly that I wrote a whole book about it. How the rigid gender binary, right, is part of that colonial legacy and ongoing settler colonial project, right? And we see it. I feel like it's not an accident that, unfortunately, within indigenous communities, like girls and women and two-spirit folks, right, are the most impacted by
yes.
systemic violence, and so yeah, this kind of, it's almost like every time there is like oppression of creativity,
Mm,
oppression of spirit, imposition of religion. The Catholic did it with the doctrine of discovery and all the harm that keeps doing, I believe. But they all seem connected, right? Restriction of spirit, there's only one way, one God. Restriction
yes.
of gender, there's only two genders, right? And restriction of creativity, well, that art is okay, that art is not okay. It's almost like you can feel an oppressive regime, but how constricted they want us to be, right? And
Hmm.
how policed gender is to be. I was just recording something yesterday that was like, well, if gender is naturally, in air quote, binary, why do we have to police it so hard? We wouldn't need laws and
That's
and
right.
and punishment if this is the natural, in air quote, state of being. But it's not. That's why they gotta police it so hard, right? It's
That's
like, oh, anyway, so much to
right.
say about that. So, which leads me, because I do want to talk about your amazing book, because if people have not read Somacultural Liberation, they should. Like, I don't think you need to be a therapist or an educator or a somatic practitioner to get a lot out of this book. And like you said, music is your main medium, let's call it,
Mhm.
for creativity. And you're also a writer. And so, what
Right.
pushed you to write this wonderful book that I recommend all the time? Like, what
Mhm.
motivated you? What was this is the thing that I need to put out into the world? Because I know how much work it is to put a book out. So,
Yeah, well, I somacultural liberation was an idea that came to me when I was going to what's called a job talk. I was applying for a job at a university, and whenever you do that, you give like a
oh my
presentation
God.
called a job talk, right? And
Yes.
so I wanted my job talk to be something new, something that the folks hadn't seen. And because I was applying for a position within a department that I actually graduated from several years beforehand, I knew what the kids were learning. I knew what the students were. I knew it because I was a
Yeah.
student there. I was a kid myself there at one point. So I was sort of thinking about the way that culture has always been something really interesting to me. I'm an anthropologist as well, and so culture has always been a cultural anthropology has always been a really big curiosity of me. So I was thinking about how culture. I'm thinking about really my own self, like how the cultures that I'm in sometimes it depends how free my body is. So if I'm
Yes.
in a group of like folks who are like
Yes.
me or like hanging out with you, my body feels free. I
Yes.
feel like, ooh, yeah, this is expansive. I feel like
Yes.
this opening, right? When I'm around folks who I feel are judging me, are different than me, or have been cruel to me, or I assume they're going to be cruel to me, there is a literal closing
Of
in of my
course.
body. Like I feel like a tightening, a constriction, and particularly like in my chest and my pectoralis muscles. And so I thought, well, if soma means body, so if like body and culture,
Yes.
understanding those two concepts helped me feel more liberated. Somacultural liberation. Oh my gosh, right? And that was sort of like the idea
I
that
love
sort of that
that.
came with. And then I put together a presentation. It went over so well. I got a standing ovation at the end of that job talk. And I was like, if I do not get this job, like, I was like, I better get this job. And I got the job and it was
Oh, good.
great. And, and then I went on and I guess when I was doing the job talk stuff, I was also in the midst of my doctoral research. So I was doing a PhD. And then when I finished, um, a lot of times, not always, but a lot of times people take their dissertation work and turn it into a book. And I was just kind of like, I just needed a break from the dissertation stuff. So, though I did want to write, and this was kind of like during the COVID days.
Yeah.
So I had been offered a couple of years prior to my book. I had been offered an opportunity to work with a company called North Atlantic Publishing, who did publish my book. And this came about because I wrote a chapter in a book called Diverse Bodies, Diverse Practices.
Yes. Another wonderful
Um,
book. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, I wrote a chapter in that book called Fieldwork, which is about how I use the five
Mhm.
rhythms, which is a dance modality to kind of
Yeah.
help free my body up a little bit. And so that the president of that company, or I'm sorry, the editor of that book, Diverse Practices, wanted to do a volume two. And so put me on an email because he wanted me to take over as the editor. He put me on an email with North Atlantic and said, hey, how about a volume two? North Atlantic wrote back and said, we're going to pass on volume two. However, if Roger Kuhn wants to write a book, and I was like, no, I'm not ready for this, right? So I literally shelved that email for a couple of years. And then one day I kind of woke up and I was really thinking about like, I want to write Somacultural Liberation. I want to dive more into that. Like, what did that really mean? Like all those years ago when I put together that job talk. And so I sent an email. I actually responded to the same email that was sent to me literally like 2 years beforehand. And within about 7 minutes, I got a response back. So the person was, at their desk clearly or something checking their email early in the morning and said, let's set up a meeting. And then I was like, okay, it's on. I've got to do this. And my inspiration for writing that book was, I think like one of the very first lines of the book was like, this is a book about connection.
Yes.
And it's meant to be a book to a guide, a roadmap, if you will, about connection with ourselves. So if I connect with myself, if I understand the way culture shapes and informs my bodily experiences, it allows me to connect to you more. Because I can then see, like, oh, you too have a culture and it's shaped your body. And it's allowed me to unlearn all of the ways that we are supposed to be, that bodies are supposed to be. And in writing that book, it was very important for me to bring the indigenous perspective because that's what I know. That's
Of
all. It's
course.
the only way that I know to be in the world is through this lens of someone who is biracial and bicultural. That's and then throw on queer, throw on gender expansive, throw on two-spirit, throw on all that. That's the only way I know how to be in the world. So of course I'm going to write from that perspective. And it was important for me also to dedicate part of that book, I think it's chapter 5, to helping folks who do not know what Two Spirit means or understands. Like I'm going to have a whole chapter on that. And then throughout the book is also sprinkled in a lot of information that folks may not know about the Native American experience. Because a book like mine in the somatic field, it hadn't existed before
No,
because,
it doesn't. It didn't.
and it still doesn't, right?
Nope.
And so even though I left that university that I was teaching at, I'd hoped that I used to teach a class there called Somatics and Society. And I had hoped that like, oh, my book will be used for that. That's what I wrote that the book for. And then in realization, it's like, no, I wrote the book for everybody, for anybody that kind of wants to understand these kinds of things. And oftentimes, folks ask me like, well, what's next for somacultural liberation? And I'm always like, I don't know. I think that like, you've got the book or someone else has the book. And like, my hope is that you take it or the listener takes it and applies it not only to their own life, though the communities that they work with, and help all of us understand that when we are in this constricted state, right, not a lot can get through, and sometimes it's important to utilize that in certain circumstances. The more though that we can stay here in that expansive place gets us one step closer to liberation, and I'll take that any day, one step closer. And that's what I hope people take from my work, is that they can get one step closer. It's Somacultural Liberation is just one more tool that folks can use in the exploration of their growth in their life, whether that is how they understand their value system or how they understand how their body reacts to certain stimuli in the world. The more information that we have, the more knowledge that we have, and how we understand that knowledge, I think is transformative, and it's very, very healing. The same way that when we learn and understand who we are, or how we identify, and the reasoning behind the identification in those particular ways, it just gives us that perpetual aha moment. And that's what longing for in my life, is to be in the perpetual state of wonder. I just want to be in the perpetual state of wonder as much as I possibly can, because culture shifts and shapes all the time. There are certain things that are very, static about our identities, though, before we hit the record button, we were talking a little bit about getting older, right? And it's like,
Yes.
yeah, like, I'm on this cusp of being 50, and I'm very excited about turning 50, though there's also like this, oh my gosh, like, what does that mean? There's like this meaning,
Oh, I
right? And
get
like
it.
this meaning that like there's a lot of supposed tos, right? Like at certain points in our trajectory of life, certain developmental markers that other people have determined we're supposed to be at. So at 50, am I supposed to do this or supposed to be that or supposed to not buy Thundercats anymore? Like, oh my gosh, they just came out with a He-Man Thundercat collaboration. I have to have that,
Ah,
right? Like, exactly, right? So it's like
absolutely.
all of these ways that like culture has told us we're not supposed to be because of our age. So then if I do those things and I feel bad or guilty about it, it's like, but that's not my understanding of my own culture. That's someone else's understanding. So then there's that sense of like, it's not mine. I don't have to hold this. I don't have to carry this. This is not mine to carry. What's mine to carry is the new Chitara Tila combo. Like, it's like, that to
Yes.
me is like, that's mine to understand and to be with and to play with and to be joyful about. And I hope that Somacultural Liberation is just that for folks. I hope it gets them thinking and gets them, more importantly, feeling and experimenting and dancing. And dancing, I don't mean necessarily like the act of dancing like I might do, but dancing in their mind, in their body, in this way of, I can be whomever I want to be, as long as I'm not hurting anyone.
Yes.
That's the important thing here. It's like, it's not about, my work and the work of so many folks who do liberation work. We sometimes, feelings get hurt sometimes by the things that I've said. Or the statements that I've made about like how Christianity has actually been harmful to many communities, or how men sometimes, or cis men in particular, have been privileged at certain times, and that sometimes these are like evocative statements supposedly to be making. Though the reality is like, well, I'm not saying these things to cause harm to any folks that follow religion or that are Christian or that identify as cis men. It's just to state that like your cultural group has harmed mine. And if you're not willing to take responsibility for that and try to heal from that, okay. And I don't know, I don't have to think you're cool. I don't have to be cool with you, and that's
Yeah.
all right. Um, I, you know, I just got turned on to this podcast. I haven't even listened to to one episode yet. It's called "I've Had It." It's like these two
Mm.
cis white women, and they're like, "I've had it with," and they'll go on about what they've
Mhm.
had it with. And there's something about that I really like, that they're kind of very bold and they're talking about this. But I'm like, I don't. I'm afraid to say that. I'm afraid
Mhm.
to be like, I've had it with, because there's so many things that I can get attacked about.
Yes.
And I've been so attacked in my life, just for existing, for being
Mhm.
like a queer little native kid in the world. I've been
Yeah.
so attacked. I'm so exhausted by it. So even though I love this idea of I've had it, I'm not ready. I'm not at that point in my life yet where I can stand up and say that so loudly, which may surprise folks because I've written a book and I'm a musician. I do all these things, and that writing Somacultural Liberation, releasing music, is my sort of external. My creative side is very external, but who I am at my core is very quiet and private. And I always say I live a very external professional life, though in my day to day, like, I don't really want to be around people. I'm very quiet. I'm just like this little insular little creature. That's how I see myself. And I know that I don't always come across that way to folks, and they're always surprised when I say those kinds of things. Though it's like, well, yeah, because who I am is still someone that's recovering from years of trauma, from a world that doesn't want me to exist. So even though my art is my way, and my creativity and my writing is a way to push back on that, I can only do so much of that because it's also physically exhausting for me.
Yes.
And the older that I've gotten, I can't get on stage like I used to when I was younger because my voice gets tired. Or, you know, writing it requires me to physically and mentally be so focused in a way that
Mhm.
I don't really want to be doing at my point in life
Yeah.
anymore. So it's interesting because even though that's why I would say I'm one step closer. Somacultural liberation is not the be all end all. It's one step, and I will take one step toward the light rather than remaining in the dark any single day in my life. And if I can find tools other than like my book or other books or podcasts or whatever it is that get me one step closer, I'm going to take it. I'm going to take that initiative. That is my challenge in my life, is to not be the loudest person in the room. My challenge in life is to take one step closer to the light.
Oh, I love all of that. There's like at least 10 threads that I want to pull out from what you
Mm.
said. So I'll just like slow myself down and feel it. And I was even feeling like just the expansiveness like enter my body as you were talking. And I was like, yes, yes, yes. There was this like resonance in so many ways. And yes, I'm also very introverted, I guess, if we want to
Mm.
use that paradigm. But people always think I'm extroverted because I can get on a stage, I can speak, I can write, I can perform. But my family teases me. It's like, you're just Italian, which is true. Because I remember when I moved from like Italy to the UK when I was 22, and everybody was like, "You're so extroverted." I was like, there was such an emotional dissonance. I was like, am I? I'm like the kid who hides in the bathroom with a book on New
Mm.
Year's Eve because there's like too many family members at this point. There's like 30 people and everybody's loud, and I need to retreat, from all the things. And, but all of a sudden, being in this very different cultural context, I
Mm.
was read very differently. And, and now I live in the Midwest and I'm like so blunt and so outspoken, even when I'm just like, feel like I'm like being so like subtle and kind, like, hey, have you considered? But even that, right? It's like, and so I was thinking about the cultural aspect, which is so missing in somatic work. I think that's one of the things
Mm.
that got me super excited when your book came out, Somacultural Liberation, is because I love the somatic work. I was kind of drawn to somatic work even before I knew what the word somatic. I remember training as a systemic therapist, whenever it was 20 plus years ago. Um, and naturally being drawn to things like family sculpting techniques, but also naturally when I was working with families and kids, let's get up, let's do a thing, let's. let's shake it out, let's dance it out, let's write it on the board. I was always a very
Yeah.
active therapist in the room, right? And in systemic therapy, there were some examples of that. So there was a little more freedom to do that. I was even drawn to drama and art therapy, but I was like, they're too psychodynamic. I don't want to,
Mm.
mess with psychodynamic folks. I'm just going to stay in my systemic world. And when I finally, like, somatic kind of exploded a little bit more on the scene and I did my training, I was really struck in a, with somatic experiencing and then dabbled in other somatic stuff. I was really struck by the lack of cultural lens. And to me is such a, disservice on numerous level. Like, right, one, because I was like, okay, so you're just doing a lot of things that we know people do in culture: move together, dance together, grieve together, right? I was like, oh, and then it was like, oh my God, Anglo white folks have to be taught that because
Yes.
that's been
Yeah.
taken, right? That is, I think sometimes that's the deepest wound of white supremacy for white folks, is the lack of culture, cultural belonging, cultural identity, and this desperate attachment sometimes to a culture they don't really know or understand. Like, I remember when I first moved to the so-called US, people be like, oh, I'm Italian too. And I start speaking Italian. They're like,
Mm.
oh, I don't speak it. And I was like, oh, so you have Italian heritage. And I understand historically how your language has been taken from you and how you have this very, very limited and almost like frozen in time and kind of
Mm.
traumatized idea of culture, because most people didn't emigrate for funsies, historically. And so I was like, oh, this is a huge gaping wound
Mm.
for white folks here in the so-called US, this kind of lack of identity, lack of culture, and this trying to engage, but without relationship is really hard. I really witness it a lot. And so, yeah, with somatic, I was like, well, you've taken a lot of this from a lot of different cultures, probably, that you don't
Oh,
acknowledge,
most definitely.
especially indigenous cultures here,
Yes. Yes.
and so I love that your book, in a way, is like somatic, yes, but that cultural lens has to be
Yeah.
present. You know what I mean? Like,
Well, I think that, as someone that has been around the somatic world for quite some time, I've recognized that there's a tendency. I'm gonna make a broad sort of statement that somatics seems to attract a certain kind of person, someone
yes,
that is interested in, like, it attracts folks who are interested in culture.
yes,
Though I found that it attracts folks who are interested in culture, though they're not willing to identify that that culture was misappropriated. They just
yes,
want to be a part of the culture. They want to be the culture. They want to do the culture. Though they don't want to say, like, yeah, that culture was taken from folks, and if we practiced it, we were demonized. Though if
mm-hmm.
you practice it, it's somehow exalted and elevated. It doesn't make
Yeah,
sense. So, being around this world and studying somatic psychology and then eventually teaching somatic psychology, it was always like, well, gosh, culture is in everything about somatics. It's
yes,
just missing that piece of the critique. And so it was almost like if you critiqued somatics, you were critiquing the very practices. It's like, well, yeah, I'm critiquing the practice because the practice existed here and the practice existed here, and you're not
yes,
mentioning that part. You're saying that this came from this person. It's like, that person didn't create that, or like that person didn't create that. I don't want to get, say names, but there
yeah,
are people in the somatic field who are very well known and credited for, like, starting these kind of
mm-hmm.
movements and modalities. It's sort of like, yeah, that they've been doing that in indigenous cultures. They've been doing that in indigenous cultures around the world. I'm not just saying to the
Yeah,
Americas,
yeah,
but
no,
indigenous cultures around the world have been doing very similar practices that weren't called that and weren't packaged like that. But because we live in this sort of capitalistic, consumerism driven world in the United States, that all, it gets appropriated in that way. And so my work is also a calling in to folks to say, like, yeah, we owe a lot of the field to
yes,
these people, to these ancestors whose work was literally stolen from them, taken from them, and then people profited off of it. And so we need to listen to folks who come from these cultures who say, when you like, I think in the sex world, the sex therapy world, like, right, there's like this whole, I'm not a part of this because I'm not a tantrista or a tantric person. Though, I've also heard some folks say, like, tantra is misappropriated in the sex therapy world, and they're doing it incorrectly. And like, so listen to people that come from this culture, and there's pushback on that. It's like, what's the pushback on? Like, clearly this person knows because it's their culture that they're coming from. Or I was I'm part of a group called Asect, and a few years ago there was someone that came onto the listserv, was talking about I don't even remember exactly what it was, but they used like the term shaman in
Oh
their,
God,
like, is
yes.
such and such a shamanic tradition, and and like people were fighting about the word, and like, well, shaman isn't owned by indigenous
I
people. It's like,
remember that.
well, that's the word that you all forced upon us.
Yes.
You forced that on us. So then you want to then use that word in a way, and it's like folks forget that, like, there are indigenous people on this listserv. And one of my challenges that I have with being in these spaces, like the sex therapy world or the sex educator world or the somatic spaces, is that I am often one of very few, if only the one, from this indigenous community. So if I speak up, it's like I don't get to be anonymous. Like, everybody knows, like, oh, that there goes Roger Kuhn again. It's
Yep.
like, well, I sometimes just want the to be anonymous and make a point. Though about that claim, what I loved so much is, like, folks who are in community with you, they do the work. They are willing to, like, those white body accomplices who are willing to do the work, to literally use their body to, like, get in front of you, so like I don't have to take the brunt of that. Because I remember, like, going to the ASEC conference, which was like maybe a couple weeks later, and I was literally afraid that
Mm-hmm.
someone was going to come to me and be like, how dare you say blah 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 what you said. And it's like, all I did was educate people about about the American Indian Religious Freedom Act. Like, that's all I did.
Mm-hmm.
And it's true. And though, like, then to be fearful of, to go into a space where I once felt so open, and here to be going there in that clenched tight space, it's like, wow. And that's why I think it's important for more indigenous authors to be in the somatic space, more queer authors to be in the somatic space, is because, one, I don't want to be alone, but also our point is incredibly valid. And indigenous, again, I'm using it in a very, very broad term, not just meaning to the Americas, but the indigenous people around the world. Like, we need more of their body stories. We need more to be informed from that bodily perspective from these folks, because culture is relevant to everything that we do. Your podcast, Gender Stories, are about culture.
Yes.
It's like, how do you separate culture from anything? I don't understand how to do that, because it's, to me, culture, the same way that spirit, it's all interwoven together. It's the way we are in the world, and how we sort of, like, our epistemological understanding is a cultural understanding.
Yes. Oh, I feel like vibration, like I'm vibrating inside. Like, it's hard to see it outside, but literally I'm like, I can feel like because I'm like, yes, yes, yes. And I think that I so resonate, and I actually remember that conversation debate. And I think I was already pretty scarred by ASEC at that point, been like dipping in and out over the years of living here. And it's nice to see some shift maybe in the field, which is exciting. And there's so many threads I want to pull up, but I'm going to start from the last one, which is like, I'm with you. I cannot talk about anything without mentioning culture, and also the historical context
Yes,
within which, right? Like, culture is both shaped and destroyed and erased, and we resist, right? And I think there is so, sometimes there's so much defensiveness or taking it personally, when I'm like, okay, hey, this is not a personal attack. This is just
that's
like
right.
a fact, or this is just like, and same with being pagan, for one of a better word, for like for almost 30 years now, actually. Yeah, from my mid 20s. So yeah, it's almost 30 years. Oh, I'm getting old. And I really feel you on that. 50 felt really big. And now I'm like, oh, I'm 54. This is great. But when I was 49, I was like, oh my God, what is happening?
Yes, the cusp.
The cusp, it's something. But, yes, people take it so personally. And yet I'm like, but we need to talk about this, because this is part of the work of collective liberation, right? This is
That's right.
part of like, if we're not aware of what has happened to people around us, how we come to be here, what is the relationship with the land and with the traditional custodian and stewards of the land, we're still here. You know, like I was really, being in pagan community, that's what I was saying. I was really, one of the things I was always really upset about is like, just I saw the pain and the hunger for culture and spirituality and ritual, but so upset that people weren't willing to also acknowledge how complicated it is,
Mm,
especially on Turtle Island, to be practicing things that so many folks have been criminalized for. And again, it's not an accident, you know. Every time that an indigenous culture has been, you know, persecuted, suppressed, they don't just go after people, they also go after music, you know,
right.
the dance practices, the spiritual practices, the drams, right?
Yeah.
You know, I'm thinking about the Sami folks and yoking being illegal in our lifetime as that has
Right.
been lifted, right?
Right.
And the loss of culture that comes with that. And often when I'm working with trans and queer people from cultures where that impact of colonization is still there, and I see the pain of having to choose, do I choose myself and queer community, or do I choose culture and all that I lose potentially, right? There's just so much there. Yeah. And so it's this dichotomy where I'm like, I want to honor spirit and the hunger that I see in a lot of white Anglo folks, you know, for ritual, for culture, and also I'm like, and you got to acknowledge that this is complex.
Yeah.
You got to be able to hold this and also not collapse in weird ways under, because I've also seen the opposite, right? That collapse of like, well, then we can't do anything. You know, how do you even like, and I was like, no, nobody's asking you to be like this.
That's
That
right.
is not the work of liberation.
That's
What
right.
that people are asking is like, just be aware, be conscious, create relationship, you know. But that's part of the problem. People don't know how to create relationships anymore
Right.
because of the lack of culture. I don't know if I'm making sense because my brain is just like,
Yes. Well, also, I would add, like, when someone says, or when I hear someone say that I'm taking this personally, or like this feels
yes,
personal to me, I read that as like something's going on with your body. You feel
exactly.
sensation in your body, and that maybe it's a constriction or a tightening or a ooh, all kind of feeling here, and that's what my work is about. Is like, how do we work with
Yes,
that feeling that like makes you want to constrict, makes you want to drop in, so that you are like, oh, no, 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 it's not about that. It's about staying in this expansive state and feeling it and understanding, like, you feel the way you do because of the culture in which you were raised in, which may have given you this prescribed set of ideas on ways to be and supposed to's that you are living your life by. So when you don't, or when that's challenged, it feels personal.
yes.
And so it's like, it's not personal. Personal would be a direct attack on someone's body or thinking or what
Personhood,
have
yeah.
you. If you feel personally attacked because you came from a culture that has harmed others, that is likely about how you were raised in your culture, maybe to believe that your culture was superior, or you were raised to believe that your culture didn't do anything because no one ever told you that your culture did that. So when you learn these things and you get that constriction, my work is about understanding that moment of collapse and staying here, and what is required for you to stay here. How can I
Yes.
help you stay open? And I
And
believe that the more we understand and know our culture, the easier it is to do this. Like, well, I feel the way I feel because of these particular understandings I have in the world. Okay, that makes sense. It makes
mhm.
sense now why I want to go like this and get blocked off. Though to stay here, it means that I am willing, and that's a big part here, is the willingness to be in the unknown and the uncertain.
Oh, I could cry. I've literally been writing about living with uncertainty for the past few
Mm,
days for my newsletter. And it's like, because I feel like it's so important in this moment. I see people grasping for easy solution, right? If this person disappears, if this system does the right thing, and I'm like, oh no, this is so much bigger than that. And the this desire to grasp and control, right? Which is part, I think it's part of colonialism, it's part of
Yeah.
patriarchy, but it's also very human, I understand that. But it's just, this lack of willingness to like be here with all that it is and
Mm,
to still be available for relationships, still be available for connection when it's possible, which is incredibly difficult right now. I'm not arguing with that, but that is the work, right? That is the work of like that one step towards liberation, like you were talking about.
yeah.
And I think that's one of the things that also was really hard, 10 years ago when I started my somatic training, was this kind of layer of like, why control over emotional regulation? And I
Mm,
remember talking about it with Kathy Kane, who was my advanced teacher for somatic experiencing, and saying, I feel like there is this kind of moral superiority of the parasympathetic common regulated state that I have real problems with culturally.
yeah.
I
Yeah.
come from a culture where we go up really easily, and I mean, the times that people in the Midwest are like, "Ooh, whoa, calm down." I was like, I am calm. I'm just excited or passionate. I was like, this is calm. Like,
Yeah.
right? I have a Puerto Rican friend who sends me all these Italian memes are pretty hilarious. It's like, how to explain to people that these folks are not fighting right now, right? But there is something about when you are brought up, in the so-called United States, North America, because I think Canada does this too, where the white supremacy culture wants you to be so constricted that when you see
Mm,
people be expansive, feels like a threat. And I
right.
think that's a lot of healing work that I've done even with white community organizers that want to work on dismantling that internalized whiteness. I'm like, get used to being with big feelings and just with
Hmm.
expansiveness, because people are even threatened by expansiveness of joy. Like there
Yeah.
is no threat, right? There's just people being like loud and connected and maybe arguing, but also arguing is not conflict.
That's right.
That's
That's
a whole
right.
other, we
Yeah.
could probably talk about for an hour about that. And so somatically, like how do you find that place in your body that can discern, oh,
Hmm.
this is just, upregulation and there's no threat.
That's right.
There's not always a threat in
That's
upregulation.
right. Am I still within my tolerance zone, my
Yes,
window? Am I still within that? If so,
exactly.
learn how to ride a 7. Learn how to ride a 6.5. We don't always have to be
Mm-hmm.
at a 2, right? Like,
Yes.
although that may be like more optimal in the world, though the
Mm-hmm.
world is not like that, right? We can't. There's a certain privilege that I take every now and then, which is I say I'm not going to go on social media for like a month and a half,
Mm-hmm.
because my system just can't handle all the stuff going out
Absolutely.
like that. Though it's a very particular privilege to be able to like unplug in that particular way. Um, though what I have learned is that um, if I don't pick up my phone first thing in the morning,
Mm-hmm.
I am in a better regulated state throughout the day because I'm not in that. My like social media feed is always like liberation focused, so
Yes.
I'm always seeing really devastating things.
Yeah.
And so if I look at that, I usually get up around 5:30, 6 o'clock every morning. And if I look at that first thing in the morning, I'm spending the majority of my day in that, like, there's nothing I can do. I'm hopeless. It's left alone, right? Just to like, to name that, like, when, if I learn, if I understand how my body can be best optimally utilized throughout the day, I know that like, it's not good for me
Mm-hmm.
to get on my phone. That same story, I'm going to come across it at 11 a.m. as well.
Yes.
And if I give myself the first few hours of the day to journal, to read, to
Mm-hmm.
be with my husband and my dog, to exercise, to do the things that really allow me to stay regulated, then I can be in that space where I can take that stuff in. Because I'm a therapist, and I know that throughout my day, my window is going to get smaller and smaller and
Yeah.
smaller because we hear horrible things throughout the day. Like
Yeah.
I would say, like people don't come to therapy because their lives are great. So I am preparing for folks. Sex therapy. I'll say this about sex therapy. Sex therapy is grief therapy. I am
Yes.
a grief therapist that has a really
Yes.
fun, funky title. That's it. Because again, no one's coming to me because their sex life is great. They're coming because
Mm-hmm.
something is going on physiologically, psychologically, culturally, relationally in their sexual life that is causing them pain. So I
Yes.
know that I'm about to hear this throughout my day. So am I going to start my day in pain by picking up my phone and scrolling on Instagram and being reminded of the atrocities in the world that I know are there? Or can I give myself a little bit of a break and not pick my phone up and check that stuff until like 10 or 11? And I choose the latter because I know that I've made my dedication to someone that I'm going to be there for you.
Mm-hmm.
And if I have a session at 8 a.m. and I've got children being murdered on my mind, I'm not going to be there. My body's not going to be there. So I consciously have learned how to do this as I've gotten in this field for as long as I've been in it, because I need to stay here as much as I can to show people it's possible.
Yes. Hmm. I love that. I often talk to supervisees about how we're chosen a field where we're constantly being called to doing our own work if we're going to do this well. And that means really like being willing to look at kind of our own stuff as it comes up, being willing to grow because more stuff will come up as we move through the world. And there isn't
Yeah.
this division between, like, and I think that the what makes us good therapists or good enough is that willingness to do our own work, to walk the walk. I remember seeing a client who's also a therapist, and I feel like this is still within HIPAA compliance, going, well, you don't really do this, right? I'm like, no, I do. I would never ask a client to
Mm,
do something that I don't practice myself. There are
right.
modalities I did not train in because it didn't work for me. When I chose the modalities I'm trained in, whether it's family therapy, whether it's somatic experiencing, whether it's dance movement, I chose those modalities because they work for me. I know there's other modalities that work for other people in the world, and I know colleagues who I trust that can send people to, oh, you want to try EMDR? Here's the trusted providers I know who do
Yes.
EMDR. That's not my thing. What resonates with my body are those tools. If they resonate with you, that's great. And if not, there's other people, because also I don't, we're all essential, but none of us are special. Donald Langstrom
Mm,
Reese is
mm,
my
yeah.
good friend and elder. Uh, there is some elder who says we're all essential, but none of us is special, which really pisses off some of the younger queers sometimes. And I think that's important because also that's another aspect of white supremacy culture in the so-called US, right? It's like this exceptionalism. I'm like, no, we're all essential.
Hmm.
And none of, like, sure, we might be exceptional in our own way, and that's part of how essential we are, but there isn't like something that separates us from other humans, if that makes
Yes.
sense. And
Yeah.
that's
Hmm.
such hard work to do as therapists. I'm so aware of time, and I feel like I want to talk with you for like
Yes.
3 hours. I'm like, oh, there's more of the things that you said that I want to kind of pull out. But maybe, okay, I'm going to give myself a minute. One of the things I've been asking people, because yes, there is, ongoing genocide here, of course, ongoing genocides in Palestine, Gaza, Congo, Sudan,
Yes.
in way too many people, too many places, and they've been going on for a long time. And one of the questions I'm asking, especially my trans, queer, gender expansive folks of the global majority, folks who are minoritized in some ways in this culture, is, and you already shared some of this, but what is bringing you like joy and comfort and nourishment at the moment? Because I don't think we can keep showing up to do the work of liberation without the nourishment, personally, right? Like, we need to have that balance, and I need to trust that when I'm resting, somebody else is acting, and then when they're resting, I am resourced and can step in,
Mm.
right? We find balance in community. And so how are you finding joy and comfort, nourishment, restoration, call it whatever you will, right now?
I did a thing recently that I'm so proud of, which is I ran my very first marathon.
Yes, I saw that, and I was
Yeah, it
so
was.
excited.
It was a very very big deal for me because I am not. I've never really considered myself a runner. Though about, I guess it was end of April, I had just gotten back from Australia. I went on this really great trip to Australia, and then I had to start my training, and it was about 3.5 4 months of training for this.
Mhm.
And little by little, I ran 4 miles, 8 miles, 12, 16, and I was amazed that I could do that. It amazed me that I was able to complete 26.2 miles. And I also ran that the day of the marathon. I had an injury, still have it. I got a training injury.
Mm-hmm.
And so even though I'm still in a little bit of pain from that injury, there is still a lot of joy that like I followed through. And I think that that's what brings me joy is follow through. Is that like I have ideas and I just do them. I follow through on them. And I don't put a time limit on it. Sometimes you have to with a marathon. There's
Yeah.
like a certain like there's a certain time you got to get those training miles in. Though like when it comes to writing
Mm-hmm.
or creating, I know that like I'm under no timeline other than my own. And when I follow through, it just brings me so much joy. Like I wrote a book. I have a PhD. I ran a marathon. I've been married for almost 20 years. Like
Mm-hmm.
the follow through in my life is something I'm so incredibly proud of because I see so many folks around me, some people that I really love who don't have that. And it is one of the ways in which I've healed myself is to take an idea and put it out in the world. And that may mean that no one hears it or several people hear it or no one reads it or several people read it. And to me it's not about how many people I'm impacting. It's I did this thing that I can say to myself when I look back at my life and say, I went for it. I I followed through on the things that I dreamt about. And when I follow through on those dreams, now I get to create space for another dream. And I've had so many dreams because I've been able to kind of check a box and say, I did that, I did that, I did that, I did that, I did that.
Mm-hmm.
What else can I do? What else can I do in my life? And that's what excites me. That like this idea that being on this cusp of 50, right, means that like, wow, I haven't figured out my life yet, and awesome that I don't have it figured out yet because now I have like maybe 30, 40, maybe if I'm lucky 50 more years to figure stuff out. That excites me. So I can have a dream and I can follow through on it, and then I get to have another dream and another one and another one. Dreaming for me is limitless. There's no end to a dream because I can dream as much and as big as I want to. Same way I feel about my body, about my gender, about my orientation, about my creativity. There is no end to it. It is all
Yes.
limitless. It is all possible into how I want to create those things. And I want to use the little privilege that I have in the world to be able to make that easier for myself and make it easier for others that are traveling alongside of me or who are coming after me.
I love that so much. As you were talking, I could almost see that little kid singing on a farm in North
Oh
Dakota
yeah.
that you were talking about at the beginning and the dreams. And yeah, it's so beautiful. And I can't wait to see what you dream of next
Mm.
because so many of your dreams are so beautiful, whether it's this wonderful book, Somacultural Liberation. If you haven't read it, you should read it, and or whether it's your music that sometimes I put like kaleidoscope on and like I'm dancing.
Yeah.
I'm like, yes, I'm like, whether it's your music, whether it's your book, whether it's the wonderful work that you do within our professional association. I can't wait to see what you dream of next so much, and I'm sure we will have more conversation, but for now I want to be respectful of your time because that's the world we live in, and
Yeah.
I'm sure you have other things to do after our interview. But one question that I ask all my interviewees is there anything else that we haven't talked about that you were hoping to talk about today? And if not, that's okay too, but
I think that I feel pretty complete. Yeah, I feel pretty complete. I don't think there's anything that maybe we didn't talk about that I was hoping to. I really just came into this like with, hey, what's up? Like like let's chat, let's talk. Yeah,
I love that. And honestly, that's how I love doing the interviews for gender stories. I understand that sometimes people are like, let me know what the questions are. And I'm like, these are the seed questions, But I love that you were like, yes, I'm here and ready. And I'm
yeah.
like, yes, let's figure out where we're going together. And I love that so much. Thank you so much. And dear listeners or watchers, if you're watching on YouTube now, so I know some of you are still on all your podcast platforming. All the links to Roger's website, the book, the music are going to be in the episode description.
Thank you.
You can also follow Roger on Instagram. I know I really enjoy following you on Instagram and seeing all your adventures. And I was like, yes, you did a marathon. As
Yeah.
somebody who used to be a runner, I know how much work that is. I've never run a marathon, but I've run 10Ks, but I was like, that's a lot of miles to put
Yes,
under.
10Ks are a lot of miles too.
Yeah, it's a lot of on the joints. So I'm like, I was
Yes.
very impressed. So thank you so much for making the time.
Oh, you're
And
so welcome.
dear Gender Stories listeners, please take good and gentle care of yourself. Find a way to connect to your culture. And even if you don't know where you come from, know that spirit knows. And all you need to do is listen and find that expansiveness of gender, of liberation within yourselves. And until next time.